Everyone knows the importance of technique in climbing, and yet still so few of us have a set game plan for actually improving it. Our hope is that just by climbing more regularly, it might happen on its own. But with this approach, there's also a chance that you'll be making things worse by further ingraining bad habits. Surely it's better to find a way of correcting these once and for all, and to really feel like you can make a difference every time you practice. The secret is to start focusing on the aesthetic side of the movement. Most of us, having been taught the basic moves like bridging and laybacking, are then usually told that it's just about getting to the top and that no one gains points for style. But it's this mentality that really arrests development. Whilst you must still be ruthlessly determined, you must apply this determination to making each move with as much style and poise as possible. This will cause you to save vast amounts of energy, which in turn will propel you that much further up steep cliffs than poorly channeled aggression ever could. There are 3 general characteristics of good, efficient climbing movement which apply to all moves and all situations, and these are precise footwork, fluid movement, and correct pace. By focusing on these, first individually and then combined during your warm-up routes, and then trying to maintain the same form on harder climbs, you have a direct model for improving your technique every time you go climbing. As we learn to climb, our footwork goes through a series of clearly defined stages. The first is the banging and scuffing stage, which is bad news for obvious reasons. But even as we become quieter and eliminate the scuff, many still have a tendency to rush their foot straight to the foothold and then reposition it afterwards. By slowing down slightly as you approach the foothold, this will help you make the right decision and anticipate where it needs to go. In doing this, it's also important to recognise those times when you'll need to pivot, rather than awkwardly shuffling your foot around. Even climbers who've mastered this stage sometimes have a tendency to over-test each foothold, which is noted by a characteristic ankle bounce. This is understandable on tiny smears, but on larger footholds, it's a nervous habit which can easily be eliminated. So the answer to perfect footwork is a silent, first-time foot placement with no scuff and no ankle bounce every time you place your feet. It is also important simply to spend less time looking up and more time looking down, and always to consider moving your feet when you don't feel like you can move your hands. Practice this on your first warm-up climb, and don't be satisfied until every foot placement is perfect. We've all heard the cliche about climbing being like a game of chess, but how often would you genuinely say that you plan 2 or 3 moves in advance? Usually one move at a time is more than enough. And it's this approach that often leads us to climb in a point-to-point punctuated style. We allow ourselves far too much time to work out the next move, instead of trusting our subconscious to guide us, and this in turn causes us to waste so much energy as we hold static positions. But if we can teach ourselves to climb more fluidly and continuously, our muscles will be far more relaxed and efficient. Plus, by literally following through on a move, as would a racket player with a stroke, we will be much less likely to get those mental sticking points, which so often break our psyche. But to do this, you will need to plan the next move while you are executing the current one, and to rely more on instinct and feel than conscious judgment. Only when you're placing your feet more precisely and moving more fluidly should you attempt the next stage of the technique learning process, and that's to try and speed the whole thing up. On steep, sustained ground, there is simply no excuse for delay, And yet so often we are overindulgent in making route reading decisions. You should never try to climb quickly on your first few warm-up routes, but you should be ready to step it up a gear by your third or fourth climb. No climber has reached a level where they're beyond focusing on these basic movement skills every time they practice. How can you ever hope to cure those leg shakes on hard stuff if you can't climb perfectly on the easy stuff first? Good form is the key, not just to moving more efficiently, but to feeling so much more confident about your climbing too.